at 4:01. Our update on the 2050 plan is on the agenda, and I'm going to let Drew take us into that.
This is our last official comprehensive plan advisory committee meeting. Of course, the plan will come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, same group, for adoption later on this year. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Caitlin and her team, present what they've worked on so far.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have the presentation up? There we go. Awesome. Yeah, hello, good, almost evening. Nice to see you guys again. So as Drew said, this is the last official CPAC meeting for this process. We do still have some things we're working on, so our intent would be to be able to, and I'll talk about this again at the end, but be able to provide you guys with the draft of the plan in like 4 to 6 weeks and get some feedback on it, like on the actual plan document before it comes back to you for recommendations. So just to let you know, there will be an additional time for feedback before kind of the formal adoption process. So with that, and there we go. So today we're going to talk about some of the community feedback we heard last time in the engagement meeting that we had that evening after we talked to you guys. We have done the land use plan updates. We'll talk about those. Travis is here this time, and so he'll talk a little bit about the economics recommendations that he's been thinking about. Chris has been looking at your thoroughfare plan and your active transportation plan as well, so he'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll look at a really high level at downtown and Nimitz Lakes recommendations, those 2 small area plans. We did just have a 2-hour long, very detailed meeting with the downtown advisory group. So we got a lot of really good feedback there, and we'll continue looking at those this evening with the community, but just for sake of time, we don't have time to dig really deep into those 2 small areas today, since we are kind of talking about everything with you guys. So as you guys know, we started off in the June of 24. We're kind of here right in the middle where we're finishing up these chapter updates and we're getting into the meat of these area plan creations. And then next month and through March, we'll be kind of culminating everything into this implementation plan. And that's when we'll have that full draft of the plan that you guys will be able to review in likely late March sometime. And then we'll be coming back in like May and June to do those P&Z and council recommendations. So with that, I am going to hand it off to Caroline to kind of run us through some of the summaries of the feedback that we heard at the last meeting.
Good late afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you again. So getting started into kind of just the overall feedback that we've heard thus far. So we've had 2 CPAC meetings with y'all. We've now had 2 downtown advisory committee meetings. And we did the online survey, which was open for 6 weeks and got some pretty good feedback there. And then the public open house #1. And then the online interactive map, which is still open. Since creating this presentation, we now have 72 contributions. I just checked, so getting a little more engagement on that as well. So that's good, as it will continue to be open throughout the process, so keep pointing people there on the website. So with that interactive mapping, some of the key themes that we've seen thus far continue this idea of enhancing trails and walkability in the city, improve roads and intersections, advance traffic safety and management. I think you see a lot of that downtown, and then optimizing the use of Kerrville's natural assets, which I think is just a huge thing that the city utilizes and, promotes. So I think those are all pretty well tied together, and maybe we'll see some more as we continue on. So getting into the workshop that we had back in October, we picked a few of the overall boards to get an idea of what the community's thoughts are across just land use and other topics. So this first one is the land use trade-offs. This diagram about high services, low taxes, low density, you can only get to what were the ideas that the community was leaning towards. And you can see here that high services, low taxes, and more density was that preferred trade-off. So I think we've seen a bit of a theme about providing more options on that housing side, and so I think density was that trade-off that they're willing to kind of give and take. Next, on transportation trade-offs and priorities, they're pretty clear on the way the community swayed. So we saw more walkability and access over lower density. There's a preference of multimodal over higher speed roads, and the maintenance of existing roads over building new roads. So, creating that walkable multimodal environment that we've discussed and maintaining what's existing. Next, we had that resilience conversation that y'all also did, talking about shocks and stressors. And the biggest shock that we saw was heat, especially that summertime. Texas heat will definitely affect being able to have walkable environments and other activities. And then stressors that kind of relate to that is not relate to heat specifically, but affordable housing. I think that's a common theme that we've heard as we've interacted with the community and the boards, is creating diverse, affordable housing for the community to be able to sustain and bring in more people to live and work here. Next, we asked that overall conversation of what does responsible growth mean to you? The key themes that we saw were water conservation and availability. Water scarcity is a big thing in Central Texas, so that's another theme that we continue to see with the open house. Balancing development, you don't want to have just one or the other, keeping a good balance of residential and commercial to help sustain that environment, and then considering, groundwater availability and trying to create a very self-sustaining economic environment. Community involvement. So we've heard a lot about really making sure that the community is involved, that there's a lot of outreach done, getting local businesses involved, and just getting the word out there about this process. And lastly, infrastructure and amenities. So focusing on the city infrastructure, parks, trails, things that the city is already doing, but continuing that because it's obviously very important. So overall, in the workshop, some themes, again, that community input, really emphasizing that. Sidewalk and trail connections, expanding those, pedestrian pathways, multimodal, providing more opportunities for walking or other transportation options, housing variety, so back to that affordability, providing more variety for people to live in. And then parks and public spaces in Nimitz Lake. So that got some interest of how do we really focus on that Nimitz Lake area, and it confirmed that we should be doing a small area plan there. And so I'm also going to jump into just a quick discussion of the land use chapter. So we have created our draft land use chapter. Again, we're just updating it with the things that we've heard and making some other adjustments. So these included revising and expanding some of the place types so they're more inclusive and a little bit more clear on what truly does that place type mean and what development, making it more opportunistic to include other land use types versus just being one. So there is that flexibility of development. We assigned place types to all areas of the future land use map. So previously those 13 catalyst areas were called out and just held as just blank. So then the catalyst area discussions talked more about those land use types. We've went ahead and filled those gaps in. So you have just one overall future land use map. So you don't have to go and dig to find what types of land uses could fit in there. Then through the discussions that we've had, we reworked the catalyst areas. So we removed some because they're developed or maybe isn't needed as a catalyst area anymore. We reallocated the downtown area and the Nimitz Lake area to be their own small area plan, and then confirming the content of the ones that we kept. Another topic of just this entire update process is including resilience. So some language on that was created throughout. And then we also reviewed and confirmed the guiding principles and sample actions that were already existing in that chapter. So on just a high level, I know this might be like crazy difficult to see, but this is the new proposed future land use map. So you can see that we filled in those catalyst area holes, integrated and reallocated some of the land or the place types based on the changes made to them. So once you see the land use chapter and can review this more detailed, definitely give us any feedback that you have. If something doesn't align with what we discussed, I know it's a lot to take in right now and it's very small. So definitely take your time to review this later on.
So when you created this proposed future land use, I understand some of the catalyst areas have been built out and there's not much left in them, but what criteria did you use to create more possibilities in one land use area or changing land use areas? Where did that come from?
So a lot of just internal discussions. I think some discussions that we had with y'all and city staff. Some of it was just confirming what may have been built, or if there is a site that might be vacant, what would be a best use there. And then also looking at those catalyst areas before what was potentially proposed. So taking those and integrating them into this map.
And I think some of the feedback too, in our conversations, like with Drew, some of the feedback they've gotten from developers in just what is working and what is not working, maybe certain zoning areas that are like, we're just not being able to implement it like we thought we would, and we're having people interested, but it's just not penciling out, and so we've updated some of those areas.
So this process is possibly recommending changing zoning in some of these catalyst areas or some of these land use places?
There might be some areas that the city would actively look at a zoning change, but by and large, this will be what we use to make recommendations for zoning change applications.
And we tried to keep a lot of this as what was existing and what is existing on the ground, if it wasn't something specifically discussed or thought about to be maybe something else along the way. So it should be fairly in line and not, drastically changing something that we hadn't already talked about.
You have this map available?
We do, yeah. We can send this just alone to Drew. There's also
I'd be interested in taking a look at this.
yeah, absolutely. And I believe eventually you also get a copy of this future land use chapter, the draft, for review as well. So also, piggybacking off of that is this catalyst area revamp. So obviously the delineations were on the future land use map. With our update to the chapter, we have just created its own map that calls out the catalyst areas that we've kept. So there's now 7. And so this proposed map is those catalyst areas. I think only 1 changed boundaries. And I think that's catalyst area 2. So that was the only one that changed a little bit, but because part of it was absorbed in that Nimitz Lake small area plan. Otherwise, the other ones should be the same of the ones that we kept. So that is all I have for the land use chapter. We're going to get into economics. Do you have any other questions?
Question, 2 questions. One that way, one this way. It doesn't matter who goes first. But in your experience as professional consultants, to what extent do most cities that you work for, where you produce the first long-range plan or you're doing an update, how do they use that in their day-to-day?
You can. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so ideally, and a lot of this goes back to kind of city leadership and how they say they want it to be
Don't say
used, or
anything bad, she's sitting right there.
or demand it being used. So we've seen some of the cities we've worked for where the city manager was really adamant about the comprehensive plan, and every single time a staff member brought something in front of council for budget or CIP planning or for a zoning change, they had to point to a spot in the comprehensive plan where their recommendation was in alignment with the comprehensive plan. So that was part of like their basic thing as all city staff. They had to know how the things they were asking for were in alignment with the comp plan.
Okay, that's way
No.
over here, but.
Yeah,
most
that's like
people
the
don't do that.
extreme. So then in the other cases, I mean, in the most basic way, Drew kind of mentioned this before, when a developer comes in front of P and Z or city council with a zoning request change, you then utilize the land use map and say, is the requested zoning change in alignment with our future land use map? And you use that as your decision-making tool for zoning request changes.
Right.
And we land somewhere right there in the middle. As we work through annual priorities with council, we reference the guiding principles in the comp plan, specifically the implementation chapter, to go through things that we've checked off and have done, but other items that are still priorities, and try to identify from council what has higher priority on those action items. We do some referencing through the budget process. Not everything has to be pointed directly to the comp plan, but it does have to fall within those guiding principles.
Well,
From a planning and development side, absolutely, this is the document that we're making our recommendations to P and Z on for those zone change requests.
yeah, but now comes my personal opinion,
Okay?
which is not written anywhere. You know, that I've been in this position before in a different town. And the comprehensive plan, the long-range plan, the whatever it's called and wherever you are, is really important. Because it's, you know, from 20,000 feet, here's what it looks like, here's what's been happening. And it incorporates all kinds of things, the transportation, the water, and hopefully, you White down there on the end, the economic development part of the plan and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I realize it's not the law, you know, and it's not the stone tablets from the mountaintop. But I wonder if we, if we use it stringently enough, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think we do. When we have developers come in and make a request, working with our staff, that's the first thing we look at is your request consistent with the plan?
Okay,
And if it's not, let's talk about why it's not consistent with the plan, and does it make sense to take a
Okay.
look at that and review it. It's been a while since we've had a case come before P and Z that is a change to the plan as well. Just to try and be forward with the developer, we allow them to do that process together. Here's my zoning request, and here's the land use change request, so that they are in sync with one another. But we try to work with them at the staff level to mitigate some of those off-the-wall ideas that don't fit the plan before they land in your lap as P and Z and then on to city council.
I have another question.
thank you.
When the 2050 comprehensive plan was created and all of the catalyst areas were created, now we're looking at an update and we've got some recommended proposed changes. And you said that you guys have spoken to developers that have some questions or have some ideas. Is this group here making recommendations based on your experience and what you do on these possible changes, or is it just what you're hearing from people that are asking for things?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely our professional opinion. But then there's just some of the, when you do a plan like this, you can't know the future, right? You try,
Correct.
but you can't. And so, like one example is that the entertainment mixed use piece that was like southeast of downtown. That was in the original 2018 plan, and just over and over and over again, Drew was getting people wanting to do stuff in that area, but that zoning was so restrictive and people weren't able to make those kind of projects that the zoning called for, they weren't able to make them pencil. So that is an example of one of the areas where we went back and we said, all right, this area isn't working out as intended. Why isn't it working out? The economics of it weren't working. And so we updated that area and we expanded some of the things that could be done in there to allow for some other things. You know, we still trying to stay true to kind of the intent of what that was, but also just allowing for something to happen there, because right now nothing's happening because the zoning maybe wasn't working like.
Can you
we
give me an
wanted it
example
to.
of that, Drew?
So that one we're talking about, Water Street and Broadway south of downtown,
Huh?
down to the point where Broadway and Water merge. We've had a few projects take off within that zoning district, but we've had more requests that don't fit in that zoning district. Because it is in the comprehensive plan as entertainment mixed use, we haven't recommended any zone changes, so we haven't had anyone apply for that. So we've had several property owners in that area feel constrained by the existing zoning,
Yeah.
and that ties back to the land use plan.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily to say like, oh, you know, someone said they wanted to do this X project, and so we're just gonna cater to them and change it so it works for them. It was more of a, Drew said, hey, this area is causing us some strife. It's not working like we thought it would. Can you guys take a look at that and recommend some expansion? So like, we don't even know what those projects wanted to be, but Drew just kind of pointed that out as an example of an area that wasn't working and asked us to like take another look at that, see what else we could do with it that still made sense, you know, from our professional opinions, so.
So when we finish this process, you're gonna present a document or a plan that's gonna ask to be approved as an amendment to the 2050 plan, as an update to the 2050 plan. One of the things I would like to see you guys do, and you guys as well, we have instances, and we have more than you realize, we have someone come before planning and zoning wanting to do something. And it's being said that it's what's recommended, or it fits in with the 2050 plan that was created. And then we have people out here that have studied the 2050 plan, and they stand up and they rebut that. And they say, well, if you're gonna follow the 2050 plan, that's not necessarily the case. Development butts heads with, maintaining small town charm, or whatever you want to call it. So when we do this, it would be really nice to have the language that if you're going to use this as a recommendation to approve this, because this is in line with the 2050 plan, or whatever we're going to call this, we really need to tighten that up a little bit, in my opinion.
And
We face that a lot.
we do, and I think there will always be some instances.
Agree with you, but
that
I mean, we
conflict.
had a classic example where we had a annexation zoning request coming here at our last meeting. And on the one hand, we're saying this is in line with the 2050 plan. We had one of the people that lives in the area that was pretty good about enlightening us and saying, I don't agree with that. That's not in line with what the total 2050 plan says. I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong. I'm just saying if we're gonna use this as a tool, that's something you guys could help us with
Yeah,
to really, you know, if you're gonna make some recommended changes, some land use changes, you're gonna recommend some zoning changes, let's keep that in mind when we do that, so we can.
And some of those are difficult to align perfectly. And obviously, priorities in economic and market, priorities in housing, and priorities in land use may not always align. And that's where, as staff, we try to give you the best recommendation we can, that this meets the land use plan, it checks off a housing plan, but it may not be the economic market that we anticipated, or some variation thereof.
And real quick too, sorry to chime in. One of the things with these comprehensive plans, sometimes it's really based off of the council, which is why this year we really wanted city council to focus on council objectives. You know, they take bits and pieces of this 2050 plan, because we can all say, well, this is the Bible, this is what we're gonna do. But I can ask 10 different people, I'm gonna get 10 different answers, right?
Sure, and I don't look at it as a Bible anyway.
And that's where city council really comes into play on the council objectives, is how do they prioritize an existing plan into bite-sized chunks that fit into those objectives for 1 or 2 years, and then that gets reevaluated. you know, maybe it changed it. Maybe it got away from quality of life and it's on housing, or maybe now it's not a focus on housing, it's a focus on something else. And that's why that's really, really critical. And city council this year has done their due diligence on that.
And I agree, and I think we're looking at an opportunity to maybe make this more palpable for people that live in an area that's gonna be affected by annexation or development.
Yes, sir.
And we can better explain or better justify what we're being asked to approve. Nothing's ever, like Drew said, nothing's ever perfect, but it would be nice if, since we have an opportunity now to try to tweak it a little bit and make it a little bit more directed.
With those chapter updates, we'll look at that.
I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and one thing we have already been starting to add to the update that you'll see in the draft chapter is for each of the place types that were identified in the 2018 plan. So we're updating some of the language in there, but then we're also adding what we call like a dashboard elements to it that do give a little bit more of that teeth that say, you know, it's not just the narrative. It's like, what does that actually mean? Here's like appropriate uses, appropriate development types that meet that intent and that description. So hopefully
It'll be very helpful.
that'll be helpful.
That'll be very helpful. And it'll be good for us to be able to take a look at this too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll answer some questions for me anyway.
Okay. All right, Travis is going to talk to you now about economics.
Here we go. So I'm Travis James with TXP based out of Austin. I'm your economic development subconsultant. My task was to look at economic demographic trends and then provide some recommendations, updates to what are already, there are about 12 economic development recommendations in the 2050 plan. Some of them still work, some of them you've done. I like thinking in fives because it's easier. So here are what I think you all should contemplate really focusing on as part of this update. The first is going to be create a brand for Kerrville and what is a crowded hill country market. So just talking to folks and growing up in San Antonio, what is Kerrville's brand? You know what Marble Falls is, you know what Fredericksburg is. What do you get in Kerrville? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Especially because you're not on the interstate. It reminds me of a Seguin or a Victoria. You have to get off the road, go a couple miles to really see what's down here. You see the river and those kinds of things. So I think clearly establishing a brand will be helpful. The second is to balance the needs of a retiree community with vibrant community for young graduates and families. And so how do we balance the needs of which group needs shopping and entertainment? How do you allocate your resources? As Drew said, what's council's direction on the focus? That ties in, and we can talk about these in more detail, but that ties into number 3. Schreiner has a lot of growth plans, but we got to give those kids something to do. Where are they going to hang out? Where are they going to work? That's your talent pipeline, right? You look at your burst minus DES plus your in-migration, it's people moving here. So how do we keep those Schreiner graduates to stay in the community? So that's the third. Number 4 is you got to focus on small business and entrepreneurship to diversify your economy. I think you know this. There's 3 big hospitals. They dominate everything. You don't have the labor force to go recruit a 400 or 500 person company. You all know that. So entrepreneurship, especially to those kids coming out of Schreiner, right, young people. How do they start a business? Why would they choose to do it in Kerrville versus Fredericksburg versus Ingram versus Burnett? So let's make sure this is the best place to be for small business startups and entrepreneurship. The last one is going to be redevelopment of underperforming sites is just as important as Greenfield. You have infrastructure issues, you have water issues, you have older properties that aren't performing like they used to. So how do we incentivize folks redeveloping sites as opposed to just continuing to grow? And that sounds, easy and common, but the pressure is going to be from those Greenfield site owners will drag utilities to me, or let's grow and let's expand. And maybe what we should do is say, that's great, we'll do it when it makes sense, but how do we look at those underdeveloped, underutilized sites? The last one, I lied, it's not 5, there's 6. The 6th one would be, you have a lot of arts and culture in the community. Think about applying for a cultural district designation. That's a program from the Texas Commission on the Arts. They are a client of mine, but it's a program where communities come together. Your downtown arts and culture folks come together. You put a 5-year plan in place. You apply for designation, And if you get that designation, it does make you available for certain funding from the state. So you put a plan together, you're now a designated cultural district. Last legislative session, they had $5 million each year to spend. And they have more money than they have really projects to fund. So Wimberley used it in front of their theater to get sidewalks put in. Abilene used it to do an outdoor event space near their Storybook Gardens, if you've been up there. So there's lots of different ways you can be creative to use those funds. And your downtown area is where that would make sense. So does that all make sense, those 5 or 6 things, and at least how I phrased them? I mean, there are 12 in the current report. I think kind of consolidating them might be a little bit easier to work through and focus on.
Makes great sense to me, but it doesn't sound simple.
This is the divine revealed truth, since we've already talked about tablets in the Bible. I did bring you the revealed truth.
Can you expand on the incentivizing redevelopment of existing commercial? Because
Sure.
that's a huge thing.
Yeah, lots of communities use their 4B funds
Okay.
to provide grants, facade grants. I'm working in Tomball right now, and they do a lot of that. So, up near north of Houston, they don't want to just see that greenfield grow. So they'll give you $10,000, $25,000 to fix up an existing strip center to attract new tenants in. Sometimes you give them to the business themselves. Sometimes you give them to the owner of the shopping center. It's typically linked to what their investment's going to be. So you put up 50 grand, we'll maybe give you 20%, up to some kind of number.
Do you see it used for utility upgrades, like
Sure.
somebody wants to do some big commercial thing, but there's not an 8-inch high-pressure
Absolutely.
fire
Sure.
hydrant line there?
You'll run the numbers, you'll see how other people can tap into it, but yes, those are the kinds of things, because the math doesn't work probably. In downtowns, I'll go back to Seguin, they need to put sprinklers in.
Did
like
you
the
stop
second-
saying Seguin and Kerrville in the same paragraph? Seguin.
So when you're talking about the redevelopment of the
It's a rough crowd.
underperforming commercial sites,
Uh-huh.
so I guess, are we thinking of commercial developed buildings
Mm-hmm.
that the business has gone out of business, or the business is struggling?
Mm-hmm. It could be businesses struggling, they could be half empty. I mean, malls are something that, cities across the state, country are dealing with. Half of it's full, half of it's empty, ownership is fragmented. That's an issue I'm working on in Harlingen right now. They have a mall on the north side of Harlingen where it's half closed. And so how does the city and the county come in and say, what do we keep? How do we get this sales tax generator to perform like it used to in the past? So it takes on a variety of looks and feels. So sometimes it's empty, half empty, performing, but maybe, it has a vape shop or something, kind of uses you may not want. So how do we get a higher value use to go in there?
Well, I mean, those are great concepts. Dalton, is that like something EDC can,
We actually are already in the,
incentivizing existing businesses or existing properties that can be made?
it is in progress, so there's some
Great.
kind of some things that are in motion. City council, actually, that was one of their priorities, last year, kind of during the budget time, of how do we do this and what funds do we use to do that. We have talked to EIC, we are EDC has got a strategic planning coming up. And then us as a city, we're actually looking at some economic development stuff on how to tackle some of that. So yes, facade improvement grants have been, I think we have drafts of some of those already ready to go, that we just have to start putting in motion.
I mean, that would be, as part of this update of the 2050 plan, it would be great if coming out of that was the city was focusing on incentivizing existing businesses and helping redevelop existing properties, as opposed to going out and trying to recruit new. That would, if you could tie that into coming out of this 2050 update, I think that would be a really, really good
Yes, sir.
point for the city.
And we didn't talk before, but reading through this, even just about a cultural district, Main Street Advisory Board already has an application in. So there's things that he is really just reaffirming already
Right.
of other, balls that are in motion currently, or things that we've been working on or have been in process over the past year.
It's excellent.
Now I'm
And
worried,
tying it in
I
with
gotta
this is
strike two
great.
of these off and come up with 2 new ones now to stay with my,
I like to see it as, they're just easy wins that you can check off very quickly
Yeah.
after the adoption. We're confirming.
you know, the one thing that's always challenging when you say to a community, you have to rethink your brand. Some people say, no, we know who we are, we like it, so maybe, I don't know how you feel about that first one, but do you all think Kerrville has a strong brand that when you say Kerrville, people know
I don't.
this is what you get? Because that's consistent with, TIP Strategies did a little ED plan about 2 years ago, and branding and marketing, you know, was in that study as well. But, so y'all feel like Kerrville needs to come up with a, here's what you get, or here's what we stand for, kind of?
I mean, I think what y'all are working on with downtown, you can begin to get some of these things that are happening, you're talking about, and I think you can create kind of an image of what Kerrville is. I mean, I love this place, but I'm not sure we really have if people say Kerrville, I don't know what they think about, honestly. Have you guys had has there been any questions about that during your process of when you talk to people, you ask them, when you hear Kerrville, what do you think about?
Well, I think most of the people we've been talking to are from Kerrville. So,
That's okay, that's okay, you asked me
Yeah.
when I
I
hear,
mean, we hear a lot, family-friendly, safe, small town. It's a lot of what we've kind of heard is Kerrville's thing.
You know, so I spoke to the folks at the hospital and the university and your economic development folks. We talked about that, right? It's hard to recruit people here, you know, a spouse or someone who's gonna try to go to the hospital. I think part of it is you just don't know what it is. If you're not from this area,
right,
you don't really know what you're getting. I mean, for me, I think, James, you know, you think about the standard things, hospitals, James Avery, HEB, but if you're not from
Right.
here, you know, Fredericksburg tells you wine, right? For you get that. So I think that would help you recruit people and businesses if, you know, Kerrville was top of mind.
And
Anything else?
how would you brand Kerrville?
That's a great question. I'll let her jump in. I think you have the river. I mean, I think the river is an asset. So I did some work 15 years ago, I should say, if y'all know Guy Overby and
Yeah.
Brian Bondi, and I gotta be careful now. One of our recommendations was, you're not gonna find a tenant for the old hospital, you should probably tear it down. And that didn't go over well, so we removed it from the plan. Lo and behold, it got torn down. I think the river is an underutilized asset that you don't even know is there when you're in this place. So I think build it around the river. That gives you something unique. Get people down there, restaurants, shops, and they can talk a little bit about that. But I think the river.
Is it too far out? I mean, most people don't know that Kerrville's first industry, other than cows, whatever, was cypress trees
shingles.
and the shingles and, you know, the
I didn't know that.
mill, yeah.
So
We
I
still
said
have
the
some.
water, natural resources, the water, people love to be outside. You know, so give people things to do for a day, then give them enough for 2 days, now they're staying overnight and spending more money. So give me something to do for a full day, add more things to it, so I'll spend the night, and now you start really expanding. You know, you have the Folk Life Festival and some other things, right, that people think of, but just more to do if, you know, my wife and I just show up on a random weekend, I got enough to do. I don't know. All right, so I think I passed. Any other questions or comments, and I'll let the next group go?
Okay, since I've been chomping on the bit, my first thought, as an outsider who would visit Kerrville somewhat regularly as a kid, I'd say it's a hidden gem. It doesn't really stand out as a tourist trap like Fredericksburg, but it's such a lovely little town to visit. It's beautiful, and I think kind of cashing on that scenic, but not necessarily obscure, but kind of not touristy aspect.
No inner tubes.
Yeah.
Can I say something real quick? This cultural district designation that we're applying for, we had to meet, one of the requirements is you have to have at least 5 cultural art events or venues in the downtown district, and we had 7. If you count the atelier that's doing her art over by Clint Arms, who will be moving in, and you have the Callow Theater, you have the Arcadia Live, I can't remember all of them, but we met those requirements off the chart. So I think we were already a designation that just hadn't applied for it yet. So the good news is, in June, after we apply for this, end of this month, we can apply for grant money for sidewalks or a new facade or something to put back into downtown. And then the other thing is, the Main Street Board is planning a festival in October, a downtown festival, and we're struggling with the name and how we should brand it, but it will include all of these places I just mentioned, which will draw people to it. It's just a one-day event, but maybe next year it'll be two. And we're trying to keep it where it can be a continuing festival, not a chalk festival, although there might be chalk artists there. But it will have other artists of music and food and a kids parade. And
Name is important. Try to cut the
well, the one
name.
we've come up with is Water Street Festival in downtown Kerrville. And we didn't want to call it a fall festival or an orange festival or a pecan festival, or we wanted to try to keep it, festival generally means a fun time to most people, Oktoberfest. And so if y'all have any ideas, we haven't branded it yet.
All right, we'll keep
I just wanted
working.
to plug that in.
All right, I'll pass it over to Chris.
Hard part.
Hey y'all. All right. Transportation. And so I've been working on a transportation chapter with Mallory Skates as well, a transportation engineer in our office. And so for the thoroughfare plan, I think it really is kind of a true update on kind of like the future land use map and whatnot. It is really about kind of filling in kind of adding new collectors in a lot of where you're kind of having new subdivisions come in. Those weren't reflected on your last plan. And so it was about kind of getting some additional connectivity and just reflecting what is just coming in, specifically kind of behind Hal Peterson School. There's a new development coming in. And so we're looking at aligning that with the plat that we have. And you'll see also kind of east of Veterans Parkway, there's a lot of new developments kind of occurring in that ETJ, and so I know the map is a bit small. We'll get you some nice big blown up PDF versions you guys can mark up and dive in deeper if you would like to. And so really about filling in those areas as well with collectors, increasing connectivity. I think the last plan did a really good job of identifying the issues of connectivity, really in any town we've worked in, at pretty much any size. Connectivity is kind of your key to mitigating traffic and distributing people among a lot more routes into a larger variety of destinations. We'll see even in small cities in central Texas, they'll have the standard Euclidean zoning. You'll have a couple activity centers with your HEB and whatnot, and you'll have just a couple main thoroughfares. Everyone's going on one or two arterials to get to the one place that they all have to go at the same time every day. And so our kind of goal here with this plan was to distribute the routes around the schools and a lot of your activity centers, and just make sure to increase the connectivity where we can, propose new routes where there is right-of-way for us, to work with a little bit. And so I think that was really kind of the larger motivating thought behind, where there are new extensions, a lot of them in the ETJ. We did add a new collector designation, so a new functional classification. So in the old plan, it was just had collectors. Now we have major and minor collectors. Minor collectors, houses can front those. A major collector is kind of one step above that. There is not supposed to be really houses fronting a major collector, but it's going to be doing a little bit less traffic volume than your kind of like a minor arterial. So we just want to make sure we broke that up, and we'll kind of provide standards and whatnot for all those, and we'll be updating the cross sections for those as well. Nothing too dramatic, but just to keep it aligned with the new functional classification and make sure they're all kind of looking the same way. So I think that's kind of the thoroughfare plan. I don't think there's any surprises, I would say, in here. I think it was really just went through road by road with staff and, where they saw demand, where they know developments are coming, we're making sure to include new routes for that. So I will leave that there. If you want me to stop, if you have any particular questions. If not, I can jump over to the active transportation plan.
Good.
All right, great. So the active transportation plan, so this one, there is some updates, there is some changes. And I think that was one of the kind of big things that we took from staff and from public engagement. What I heard a lot from people, I was kind of at some of the transportation boards and whatnot, and people would come up and be like, man, I just want to be able to walk downtown. It is so hot. And there's no trees in downtown. There's a good amount, I mean, there are good parts of downtown. There are obviously have a lot of business, a lot of things going on with them. And so it's really about completing that downtown sidewalk network. That's what that big mess of purple in there. Again, a nicer, high quality PDF that will be sent to you. And you can kind of see where the proposed versus what's existing in that core there. But we wanted to make sure that we recommended, even though right-of-way is a little bit of a toughie there, that's an understatement. And I think that we really think that should be a priority, is to get sidewalks and complete that grid, because that downtown land is so valuable, and has already really been very successful on the portions that do have a significant amount of connectivity. And so we also had the recent River Trail Master Plan update. I believe that's being worked on with staff. I don't know if it's quite published yet, but that we want to make sure we included those trails in there. So we have proposed trails that go from a new one that's going south from the sports complex, and then we have connections that are kind of starting at 98 and then going along the river, connecting to the Dietert Center, and then on the south bank also connecting, so starting from 98, going to Granger McDonald Park, and then kind of going over to the Riverside Nature Center. So we just want to make sure that we were in full alignment with all the other great planning processes that are going on with the city. And yeah, I think for the most part, you also see there's some proposed like sidewalks that look like they're kind of on the ETJ randomly there. They're not random. Those are just aligned with the thoroughfare plan. Since your cross sections do have sidewalks going with all these roads, we just want to make sure that we had those sidewalks that would be accompanying those future roadways, just reflected in this plan here. But those will, for the most part, be kind of your standard sidewalks. And then for your arterials, might be more of like a shared use path, something a little bit more buffered off from the roadway. So yeah, I think that's for the most part. The high points, if you have any questions on those.
On the sidewalks, currently, correct if I'm wrong, when you are building something, you're the one that's responsible for the cost of those, is that correct?
That is correct.
Will that continue to be the case, and how are we gonna go back in and retro
Cam Retro.
For,
these in? Who's covering that cost?
so for new development, the subdivision code requires the sidewalks to go in with the road. For existing developments that are not complete, the sidewalks go in with the building permit. And then for infill, that would be city project.
And we try to do infill stuff through safe routes to school or transportation alternatives. Like we have a project going on right now with TA for sidewalks, but.
Yay on that one, by the way.
Great,
As someone that walks everywhere, I love it.
great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys.
I think it was just the big ideas. Oh. It's a little bit, there we go. All right, so thanks everybody. So you heard from a lot of our team members on kind of the parts and pieces that everyone's been working on. So one thing that we've talked about internally kind of as a group is, so what are the 5 big ideas? What are the 5 things we're really focusing on as across this plan in all of these different topics? And some of these are going to be pretty reminiscent of some of the economic development ideas that Travis was talking about. Some of them are a little bit more broader or different. But really it's number 1 is you are the regional hub. Lean into that. Unlike maybe a Fredericksburg, you're not necessarily a tourist hub, but you can be that regional hub for what we're calling like regional locals. So not necessarily just people from Kerrville, but the locals from kind of your surrounding communities throughout Kerr County. Lean into that identity as a regional hub, both for commerce and for arts and culture. I'm doubling down on Shriner. We had a really good stakeholder meeting with Shriner. We've had a lot of conversations about how do they or maybe don't they play in the community right now. They want to be a lot more involved in the community. So we have quite a bit of focus on that. Actually, in the downtown plan is how do we connect kind of programmatically and physically to Shriner a little bit better. But overall, even from the economic development side, we really see Shriner as kind of that jewel that you guys have here, really doubling down on Shriner. How can the city support them more on some of their efforts that they're doing?
What are some of the things you came up with that? I'm a little bit curious because as somebody that's been
Yeah.
here forever,
Yeah.
rarely see the students out
Yeah.
in the restaurants, in the pubs, I just
Yeah.
don't see them anywhere.
Yeah, so part of it is diversifying the offerings in town, like through part of that downtown plan. Because right now there's just not really anywhere in downtown they want to go to.
Right.
And it's right there. It would be so easy for them, right? But they're like, oh no, we jump in the car and we drive to San Antonio. And you're like, no, like stay here. So diversifying just the offerings that you have for them to both, food and beverage, entertainment, but also like for their jobs, right? Like they could have part-time jobs at these kind of things as well. Part of, we had a long conversation with them about their football program and just how that will expand kind of their reach into the community. So we talked a lot about that. And you'll see in the downtown plan, we have the idea of a district on the south side of that TERS that we're calling the University District A, just from a branding perspective, just trying to make the point that that is really close to the university. But then also kind of programmatically, some of the uses that they talk to us about the need for incubator space for small businesses started by students. And so identifying a spot for that to happen, not necessarily on campus, but adjacent to campus, but technically in the downtown TERS, adjacent to campus, to kind of programmatically start expanding what they're doing into the rest of the community. And then just physically make those connections through some of the mobility recommendations in the downtown to actually have that physical connectivity between the downtown core and the campus. So that's some of the things that we've been talking about.
Ask that question, then I'll answer what I know.
Do we already have any incubator space, whether it's Shriner or otherwise, or?
Not that we've heard of, yeah. And I mean, that was what they were saying is like, we need it for our students. Our students want to go start small businesses, but they can't afford a retail spot in downtown,
Well,
right?
not just students, certainly students, but not just students.
Right, yeah, it wouldn't have to be just for students, it could be.
But like Shriner has already started a program where they're, correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but basically they're training people up in the wine industry. And the scientific part of it behind it, the growing, all the parts. So if we could build off of something they've already got going, for instance, let's create a business downtown. That's a wine tasting room that is teaching the ag portions to people, that is teaching people the service portion. They're all the parts where they can take what they're learning and they can have something downtown that it's cyclical. That's what I think would be a great idea.
That
Those
is a great
types of
idea.
things.
I'm leaning out so I can see you.
Yeah.
Is there a magic list somewhere of, I don't even want to call them industries, but I'll say industries that are not necessarily going to prosper just because they're giant, big box things, like, I mean, and not people buying many saddles anymore, wooden purses and things like that, but is there a direction?
I mean, in general, people have, target industry lists, which are important, and you will have some of those, whether it's kind of broader or at the retail level. I always think it's better to let the market work. Use incentives and help put the businesses where you want to build the space, that if a business goes out, that another one will want to step in and occupy that space. I think that tends to be more effective than a target industry list, because as soon as you say, here's my target industry list, that's our focus, that's what council thinks, then an industry shows up that's not in that list.
Yeah.
You think, boy, we probably should have added that, right? So I think you can have direction. I mean, you may say, look, we want to focus on sit-down restaurants. We want to focus on certain kinds of shops. So Kyle's very aggressive. Kyle wants to get a lot of restaurants and retail. So they have a restaurant incentive where they give back the city's 1 cent of the sales tax they generate for 3 years. So it's performance-based. They just get it back. And so that's a strategy. And they have criteria, right? We don't want, 50 coffee shops where you don't necessarily want everybody to compete. But I think the use of incentives, whether it's on that facade grant program or a sales tax rebate, is probably the best way to go get those kinds of businesses.
How often is that approached, not as a specific item, and I'm not talking about service now, but I'll just manufacture, something where there's a product, where the criteria are so many people, or an average wage, or stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that-
site selectors do that, and every company's gonna be different based on their size. I mean, so you have limitations with workforce
Sure.
and water.
Mhm.
So that's gonna knock out a lot of them, on the manufacturing side. But, small kind of 5 to 10 person, customized things you may be able to go after. I don't know that you build a strategy around it. I mean, you want to be responsive. In the land use map, you want to have a place where they can go.
Right.
I mean, yeah, every company has their own criteria, right? Everybody now wants Costco's. That's the latest thing that every city I work, I want a Costco, But
I mean,
they ha-
fair.
Yeah. Or how about a Trader Joe's while we're at it? It used to be Whole Foods. But yeah, they have their criteria. The other thing for those is, look, we can open 5 stores a year. There's 500 great locations. Your problem is you may be number 400 on the list.
Yeah.
And so it can be frustrating, which is like, there's so much pent up demand. And like, yeah, but you're number 400. I can go make more money on. And so again, that's where you can use incentives to pull projects forward, as opposed to trying to create a market. So that's where the use of incentives can say, hey, instead of having to wait 4 years, maybe you show up next year.
I think you still have to have the market for the product.
You still have to have the market for the product. I mean, your location, yeah.
You still have to be on the list in the first
Yeah,
place.
you gotta be on the
but-
list in the first place, but, there's retail consultants and recruiters every day, going to, just sort of pounding the pavement. So the question for you all is, do you want your retail owners and landowners doing that, or do you want the EDC to do that? And then how do incentives fit in? And that goes back to the, what's council's direction and how they want to spend our limited resources for the next,
And one of the things that we've done that's extremely successful, one of that Shriner University has done, is they've created a facility on campus. It's called Trailhead. And that's where you'll see all the college students. They don't come downtown. There isn't anything like that downtown. There's a couple of craft breweries downtown that I'm sure that if you didn't have Trailhead out there, those craft breweries would be full of college kids weekends and a lot of times. But you just have to go to the Trailhead and see what's there, and that's where those kids are.
Oh, no, I
And it's
go,
on campus.
it's
They don't
beautiful,
drive
but
and-
we've got to
Yeah.
think beyond that.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out a way to get them interacting with our community on a regular basis,
Yeah, at least for Shriner, some of it just does come with size. I mean,
Yeah.
you just need for Shriner to hit that critical mass. So as opposed to having 1,000 students, once they get, say, 2,000 or 3,000, okay, now I see there's a market. Otherwise, 1,000 college kids, half of them are broke, right? So.
They're all broke.
But their parents.
I didn't tell my
Their
kids in
parents
college that
aren't.
they're getting cut off,
Yeah.
if that's the case. But so I think some of it with Shriner is that university district, but that's where you've got to make that decision to just help it grow.
Yeah.
You see that in San Antonio with UTSA.
Yeah.
You know, is that the role of a city? I don't know. They think it's really, really important for their
Completely different
talent
focus.
attraction,
Yeah.
so they're willing to put land in and spend money. That may be appropriate at some point for you all with Shriner, so.
Thanks, Travis. All right, so the next two, I think the utilize your natural capital, through the questions in Travis's section, we kind of talked about that, right? The river is something unique. That is one of those things in that crowded hill country market. Who are you? You have this river asset that's pretty unique to Kerrville. Promoting the redevelopment over kind of building out and greenfield development. I think we talked at length about that. And then the diversify housing, that's something we just keep hearing over and over again. And it's, you know, how are we providing not just additional housing, but additional housing choice for maybe people who are already here and want to downsize potentially, or students who want to stay, creating a little bit more affordability in the market through different housing products for nurses, teachers, those kind of folks. So that diversify housing. So those are kind of like our big things that we're keeping in mind throughout all of these topics, is how do we do these 5 things through transportation, through economic development, through land use planning, and so on. So does that kind of feel right? Are any of these off, or are we just missing, are we missing any big
I think they're
ideas?
good points, it's just, and it's a good plan, it's just getting there, and it's not easy, especially in a city like Kerrville.
Yeah. And this, you know, this really starts underlying that brand conversation too. When you go to start creating a brand, it's like, all right, here's our 5 big things. So what is the brand that those 5 things are working towards?
Tyrese anymore.
All right, so if we're on the right track there, then that sounds good. And we're gonna jump into something a little different. So we're gonna talk about downtown. Like I noted, we just had a very long meeting on this. And for sake of time, I'm not gonna go through that entire presentation again, but I wanna give you guys the highlights and the high points of what we're talking about in downtown. And, you know, they do have a whole separate advisory committee just talking about downtown as well. So what we heard from our engagements when we were here last in October, we heard a lot of wants around some additional mixed use in downtown, restaurants, hotel, and live entertainment. I don't know that any of that's that surprising, but I was really excited to see mixed use so high on the list. Sometimes mixed use is kind of scary in some communities, but we've really heard a lot of support for it here, so we're very excited about incorporating that idea into some of our recommendations. And so how we have gone about creating, at this point, the framework plan. So we're at kind of the conceptual framework plan spot with the downtown plan right now. The next step will be adding a lot more details into each of these ideas. But we want to make sure, again, we're on the right track of the framework that we're coming up with for downtown first. So we begin by looking at catalyst sites. So the pink sites are those that we could see major redevelopment happening. So it's the mall, it's the Entertain Mart, it's some empty lots, some conglomeration of empty lots together. And then the yellow is more minor redevelopment, maybe infill. There's already some stuff there that maybe we could see turnover, or maybe we could see additional things added to those areas in between the existing uses. And those were mostly identified in the 2018 plan.
No.
And so we've kind of looked at that and confirmed what the 2018 plan was looking at for catalyst sites. And so what really the big takeaway for us is that if you look at all that yellow, it is on the west side of Sidney Baker, which right now I'm not sure many people would think of as downtown, right? Except for a few things on that side of that highway. So one thing that's just started generating for us out of this identification of catalyst sites is, all right, we're needing to expand the downtown experience west. So with that, we started identifying some character areas. So you'll see in the orange is the downtown core, which right now you do have an identified downtown core. It's about half that size. And so we're talking about expanding that downtown core again west, including those cultural assets that you have along the river, including the Entertain Mart redevelopment, and then including some of your other assets, Pint and Plow's over there, the rail yard cafes over there. So some of those things that are happening over there, but kind of feel a little bit disconnected. And then the commercial corridor going along Sidney Baker, kind of northeast of the downtown core, that a bit is what it is. It's going to be a commercial corridor. It's a TxDOT right-of-way. It kind of is going to continue that character for the foreseeable future. Then the blue is what we're calling supporting development. So that is where the city isn't going to put as much investment into those areas as you might put into the downtown core in terms of creating a true pedestrian experience, but you're still going to do some basic investments to enhance connectivity and safety in terms of sidewalks and lighting and things like that. But you're not trying to really, blow it out of the water in those areas. You're going to let the market take care of a lot of the development that happens out there. The transition zone in the yellow, that's similar to a supporting zone, but that's where we could see maybe a bit more density than what we were thinking in the supporting zone. So downtown core and supporting zone, we've been talking about like 1 to 3 story developments, and then the transition zone, we're talking about potentially like up to 5, and maybe even more if a specific use like a hotel or something that needs a little bit more height than that. And then the university district, so this is what I mentioned earlier. So this is kind of the tail end of your TERS. It is adjacent to the Schreiner University campus. And so this is where, again, that previously that entertainment mixed use zoning was in this area. And that was the area we were specifically asked to look at a little bit deeper. And so the entertainment and mixed use uses are still in here, but it's just there's also some additional things like some of those innovation, really light flex industrial, incubator type spaces could be appropriate here as well. And what we're really just trying to do is expand it a little bit beyond that current EMU zoning and do some things that support both the goals of the downtown and the university. Again, connecting the university to downtown, both kind of programmatically and physically. So that is kind of the main thought there. Any questions on character areas? Does this feel like what?
So what have you guys seen in terms of, and you might be able to answer this, but so when you're expanding the area of downtown of what's traditionally been known, what are some of the things that you are doing to create a cohesive, hey, we are in downtown?
Sure.
So,
Yeah, so a lot of that, you're already kind of organically seeing some of the businesses pop up over there that are like the Pint and Plow, for example, right, that are starting to draw that activity that direction. With the Entertain Mart redevelopment, what that ends up being is going to additionally start adding those active uses on, hopefully adding those active uses on that side of downtown. So it's kind of organically happening from a use standpoint. So then what we're looking at as part of this downtown plan, which we're looking for the downtown plan, it's very specifically kind of looking at the public realm investment. So we're not doing a bunch of economic development stuff for downtown. We're really looking at those physical aspects of downtown. So for that connection, it's looking at the roadways, looking at how do we provide multimodal access across Sidney Baker so that people can go to that. They can kind of flow back and forth between these two sides of downtown. And those cultural assets that are starting to come over there too, that are in progress right now, that's going to create a lot of activity. And we had a really interesting conversation in the downtown meeting earlier today about, that's the side that the parking garage is on. So there is some, asset to that, additional uses could go over there and not have to cross Sidney Baker from the parking garage, right? So there's some assets coming over there. So it is actually more of a reflection of what's already starting to happen and then adding a little bit of that city investment into the public realm piece of it. that's really doing that expansion. All right, so then some of the framework elements that we start overlaying on top of that character area plan, and you can see here in the orange, that's the faded out area of that downtown core. So we are looking at adding a series of potential downtown open spaces, kind of two types, one being the more urban public space. Those could be maybe more plaza type. They would still have beautification and greenery, but they might have more paving than, say, a more natural area along the river. So you'll see here we've identified a series of those urban public spaces, and we tried to spread them out. So one on the west side of Sidney Baker with that potential Entertainment redevelopment, knowing that, you know, the city's not gonna have a ton of control over that development, but, you know, in working with whoever's doing that project and saying, you know, one of our visions is to incorporate a nice downtown public space as part of that redevelopment is something the city is really interested in seeing. And then on the east side of Sidney Baker in the core, kind of reopening those conversations with the county and seeing if there's something that can be done with that front side of their property that really could add a little bit more value to the downtown experience. And then, of course, there's already the open space right out here in front of City Hall, but how can you just be utilizing that more? It's not just a pretty space to look at, but how is it actually being used, especially in conjunction with a potential space in front of the courthouse? That could really have some good synergies there. And then further down between the transition zone and the university district, this is where we saw the opportunity for a larger public plaza or open space. That's the block with the fire station. So we're not saying the fire station goes away. We're saying you potentially create a public plaza around the fire station. And that's where you could have a little bit more space to do something when you're a little bit more constrained in the core. And again, creating kind of that nexus down to that university district. And then, of course, along the river, identifying additional areas kind of along that north bank where there's floodplain, utilizing that for more natural open space, connection of the river trail. We understand there's that proposed boardwalk concept that's out there, so confirming, yes, that's a good idea, put it in your plan just for additional support for that idea. And then the crossing that's already existing over the river to Louise Hayes Park from the library. And then you'll see a series of green arrows kind of pointing down into the river. So those are, we've looked at kind of use and right-of-ways, and I have identified those 5 spots as potential river access or points where you could connect down to that river trail. And then on that, we overlay the mobility framework. You can see the black lines. Those are our 2 TxDOT right-of-ways that are running through downtown. So we begin by just looking at minimizing pedestrians along those major thoroughfares. We try not to mix cars and people to the extent possible. So with that being said, how do we connect the core to itself? And then how do we connect the core to areas outside of downtown as well? So that's what those purple arrows are denoting. Primary multimodal corridors where you'd put the most investment into sidewalks, bike lanes, that pedestrian safety and experience. So you'll see those make a kind of square around within the core, but then they also along Water Street, they go down to Shriner and also out to our other small area plan, which is Nimitz. So then, additional to that, you'll see the secondary corridors, which is basically everything else in downtown. Chris kind of mentioned this. Yes, we just want sidewalks everywhere in downtown. So that's what that is denoting. Basically, all the rest of the street should also get at least minimum sidewalk infrastructure and investment. One thing to note is that, yes, we understand in some spots we are drawing lines over non-roads and even potentially buildings. So one thing to note is that, you know, this is a 2050 plan, and so we're not saying you're going to go out and demolish buildings in order to build a sidewalk, but as sites over the next 25 years potentially start to redevelop or reorganize themselves, you should be looking at reconnecting your grid in that northern part of downtown. And then one of our, we don't have the specific alley activation slide in this presentation, but we had a really good conversation about it with the downtown committee. This alley that you can see going through the University District, so it's in the pink between Broadway and Water Street. So we heard alley activation as an interest from people at the community meeting, and we thought that was a really great idea just to kind of start digging into. You don't have a lot of actual alleys in your downtown core, but we did identify this area in the University District that has about a 7-block long alley that's not being utilized for a lot. I mean, it's a functional alley, so that would be part of the implementation, is figuring out how to move that function of, you know, trash service and access and things. But this could be a really interesting spot to provide a little bit of a different or unique experience from the downtown core, bring some interest to the University District, allow those businesses to have kind of a front door on the street, but also a back door that creates kind of a cool pedestrian experience through the alleyway. So that was an idea that I think went over pretty well with the Downtown Advisory Committee. And then of course, we then have to go back and think about what conflicts are we starting to create with all of these. And so you'll see there kind of in the red flashy dots, those are the areas where our primary corridors cross TxDOT right-of-ways, and so that's where you would have to put a little bit more investment into those intersections just to make sure you're really keeping people safe in those crossings. And then all of that kind of overlays into what we call the overall framework plan. So there you see all of the things we just talked about with the catalyst sites, the open spaces, the mobility, all there together. So that's the framework plan we're looking at moving forward with. So we add a lot more detail, we add actions, we add implementation, and all of those kind of things to this plan in the next step. Questions about downtown?
It's just awesome. Really good.
Cool. That's what I wanted to hear. We can end
No,
the meeting.
it's really, it's really amazing, and it's
Thank you.
incentivizing, it's like energizing.
That's what yes. Inspiring, hopefully. All right, great. And then last, David's going to talk about Nimitz Lake.
All right, I know it's already getting late, so we won't spend more time than we need to on this, but this is our second kind of focus area, a little up the river from downtown, so similar to when we looked at downtown, we did kind of a visual preference and land use survey of folks who were at the last open house. Our key takeaways here along Nimitz was more trails, more parks. We do have some existing limitations there that I'll get to in a second, but overall, we wanted more access to the lake. We also wanted some lakefront seating. There is some already out there, like Billy Jean's and a couple of the restaurants out there, but overall, there's not enough interaction between the businesses along Sidney Baker and the lake. Just a personal note, one of my first high school jobs was at the lake house, so it's pretty cool to be able to do this study of Nimitz Lake, and even back then it was kind of like, oh yeah, there's a lake back there. Like you wouldn't know driving along Junction Highway that there's an actual wide spot in the Guadalupe River back there. So what do we do to kind of activate that? Well, additional uses that were identified as being desirable, and you don't have to strain to look at all of this stuff because we kind of summarized it there on the left-hand side. But as with downtown, mixed use, maybe a little bit of height so we can see the river, see the lake a little bit better. More restaurants and retail, that one's kind of obvious. We could have probably predicted that folks want more restaurants. Maybe an opportunity to create some spaces for kind of unique sort of local restaurants that have that river interface. Maybe those are folks who then don't have to go and compete for some of those other spaces that maybe our incubator businesses would like to be in, but can't afford because they're getting kind of outworked by some of these other businesses. Maybe this is nice river frontage for them to take advantage of. Potentially a hotel, a place to stay. Inn of the Hills is not too far away, kind of one of Kerrville's more attractive hotels, but doesn't really have lake frontage. So maybe we get a hotel out there that has some balconies where you can overlook the lake. And then entertainment, live entertainment, maybe in the form of a pavilion or kind of shared space that all of the restaurants and businesses can kind of take advantage of. So just kind of starting to get thinking about some of the ideas there on both sides of the lake. Not too long ago, it was kind of just one side of the lake on the north side where you had businesses, and the south side kind of wasn't activated. And now you're kind of working with both sides. But there's still this issue of, most folks don't know it's there, most folks don't access it. There's a couple of public access points if you look at our kind of our feedback themes, but it's hard to know that they're there, and they're not super attractive or appealing. They're functional, but there's not really much else going on there. You can go down there and launch your boat or your kayak as long as it's non-motorized. That was another key point, is to keep it clean and natural. Protect the banks on either side and protect the watershed that flows into the lake. Of course, it's also a source of drinking water, so we have to be mindful of that as well. But lake access, parks, trails, ways to get into the water and enhance what's already there. On the other side of the bank, from the Junction Highway side, there's a lot of support for the River Center and for that amenity and what that brings to the lake, and then the landing development next to it. So all that kind of feeds into our land use map, and this is kind of a smaller version of the larger land use map, but really encapsulates all of our different uses that we might consider elsewhere in the city. We've got commercial along Junction Highway, and what's interesting about this study area is that it really takes the study area from the 2050 plan or the catalyst area. We didn't really change the boundaries of that too much. So on the other side of Junction Highway, you're really thinking of how can we have corridor supportive uses. They don't really touch the lake, but they do take advantage of a lot of the traffic along there. Of course, Walmart is there, and it kind of has its own economic generation. We're not necessarily saying that goes away, but maybe you have more businesses built out along in front of Walmart to take advantage of Junction Highway traffic. On either side of that, kind of bookending it, again, building that up with some mixed use, medium density combination of residential and business, maybe with a little bit more height so that you can see down into the lake, even on that side of Junction Highway. Mirroring that, kind of crossing Junction Highway, mirroring that along Guadalupe Street, where you have what's really an interesting collection of residential already, some of which is multi-story, 4 or 5 stories tall. So kind of keeping that going, knowing that that's already established, but maybe be even more intentional about having a view shed into the lake. Kind of continuing to the west, when you see that little blue icon, that's kind of nearby to the old, if you've been here long enough, the old Family Sports Center. Seeing that as a possible opportunity to maybe get a little bit more public space or a public-private partnership to operate either shared parking or expand kind of the boat launch area down there, maybe even have some boat parking so that it really visually represents that, hey, this is a waterway and this is an area for recreation. Maybe it's also even a small revenue generator, but really taking advantage of what's kind of empty space back there behind some of those businesses up there along Junction Highway. Another benefit of shared parking would be that since this is a redevelopment area in and of itself, particularly on the north side of the bank, as businesses come in, if there's shared parking that they can utilize and a trail or a boardwalk or something to kind of tie all those businesses together along the lake, that's less parking that those businesses have to put in. It's less capital costs for them up front. It's a more attractive site, maybe has a little bit more impervious area to protect the bank and protect the riparian area, maybe make it a little bit more attractive. So consolidating those parking areas, kind of enhancing those lake access areas are two aspects of the land use plan that we want to focus on. I think on the north side, On the south side, supporting the landing, mixed-use development, kind of build that out. Have some local commercial on either side to support that, take advantage of new residents coming into that area. But you'll see one of the biggest things there is the conservation area in green. That's mostly floodplain today. That's not to say that, you know, the city would come in and acquire something or that, you know, there's anything ongoing with that, but simply we want to carve out some areas here so that it's not all built up along the lake. There is some conservation area there where, you know, maybe there's a trail, a rustic or primitive trail that we put through there, but along the banks it still remains as natural as possible. Once you cross Thompson Drive, I mentioned a couple of limitations. One of those is utilities. Once you get a few hundred feet in from Thompson Drive, it becomes a little more difficult to serve those lots with utilities. So showing that as large lot residential, you know, even potentially something where we might service it not with city utilities, at least on the sewer side, and then preserving, you know, some of that small town feel through that. On the next slide, we'll kind of show how we tie that into the trail network as well, because that is the high point of this area, is within that yellow area. So again, thinking about view sheds down into the lake, potentially preserving that. So this is our open space framework. It's also our mobility framework. So if you remember back to the input that we received, one of the priorities was, you know, lake access, even crossing the lake from one side to another, since both sides have started to become activated. We want to make them more activated in the future. We do have the treatment plant that is a limiting factor there on the east side. We do want to eventually tie in with the river trail that starts near Guadalupe Park. So that is shown going along Guadalupe Drive and eventually tying in. But in terms of creating a loop around the entire area, so that we really are making this a destination that's attractive for anybody, college students, families, older people, you know, who, you know, right now are kind of one of the key demographics of Kerrville and have been for a long time. You know, we want to make this an attractive place for everybody, and that really means providing access to both sides of the lake where you don't have to get in the car and drive from one side to another. That does kind of come with some of its own challenges. You know, that's an active waterway. There's people who use the lake, you know, boats, rowing teams who use the lake now. So kind of thinking through different ways to do that. You know, maybe there's a way to make a bridge across there, but make it movable, or make it like a pontoon bridge or a floating bridge or something like that, where it can be moved or maybe expanded and retracted to allow people to use the lake. But putting that on the map so that it's kind of shown as something that we want to accomplish in connecting both of those sides from the north down to the river center and down to the landing. So again, you see those view sheds that are on both sides of the lake. You see that high point kind of identified there on the south side. So maybe if you have low density residential in that southern area, there's a public trail that goes around that residential area and leads to that high point, and then goes down to Thompson Drive, so that you've got kind of a couple of loops that connect there through the landing and provide kind of maximum accessibility to everyone who's using that area. Mentioned the public parking. Again, the floodplain management, that's your conservation areas that are carved out there. So putting it all together, kind of like we did with downtown, this is sort of the overall framework where we've got those land uses and then public assets like trails and consolidated parking put together. So this really activates kind of both sides of Nimitz Lake, makes it an attractive destination with a mixture of uses, restaurants kind of taking advantage of the waterfront. Along Junction Highway, you know, we could even look at working with TxDOT to have something like a shared use path that would provide kind of a double frontage for those businesses. So you'd have not only vehicle accessibility out front along Junction Highway, but you'd also have bicycle and pedestrian connectivity up there, and then you'd have your trail and river frontage. Could be a boardwalk, could be a paved trail back there, kind of connecting them in the back. So they'd kind of be able to take advantage of both frontages. And then you have some height kind of on the other side of Junction Highway and along Guadalupe Street to take advantage of those lake views, but not put them right up there along the lake where you've got kind of that canyon effect. We really want to open up the lake to be visible, no matter if you're on ground level or 5 stories up. So that's really the thought behind the Nimitz plan. And it takes advantage of what you got going on there. It doesn't necessarily call for any businesses, to say, hey, we want to buy you out, we want to scrape your business. That's not really what this is about. It's more a transition plan and redevelopment plan as some of those businesses kind of turn over and redevelopment opportunities present themselves. Really outside of the shared parking and enhancing those lake accesses, there's not, from an action standpoint, something that the city is like, hey, we want to go out here and do this like as soon as possible. Maybe doing some feasibility studies with the boardwalk or the path kind of along Nimitz Lake, but for the most part, this is sort of a plan for how we want to build it out over the next 10 to 20 years. So I think that's all I got for that, but stop and definitely take any questions.
I have a question for Delane. Can you pull it off in 36 months?
I've got some other projects going on.
Well, this is really a target for private money. This is really enticing investors and builders and developers and entrepreneurs to come in and do stuff like this. That you're trying to create the image to get them to come in and bring their money and build their projects. I'm assuming that's what this.
Yeah, it's really about helping to build that identity, and like has been mentioned a couple of times, and as somebody who grew up here, I agree. The river is kind of the distinguishing asset when you think about other hill country communities. Particularly Fredericksburg, they have a lot, but they don't have the river frontage or the river access. And when I tell people I'm from Kerrville, I usually get 2 reactions. One, I love Guadalupe River State Park. We go there all the time. We love RVing, or unfortunately, we know somebody in rehab. That's kind of the other thing that tends to come up. So, but the river is definitely a draw, I think, from folks who are outside of, outside of the area. They come here for kind of the quiet and the solitude. So we don't want to lose that. But on the other hand, there's definitely an opportunity here to activate that and turn it into something that draws people together and is at least an 18-hour sort of venue, maybe not 24-hour, but grab lunch, grab dinner, stick around, see a show, activating it from that standpoint.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. All right, you want to take us home?
Yep, I got just the last slide, which is next steps. So I mentioned some of this earlier. We plan to, over the next kind of 4 to 6 weeks, take everything we hear from these meetings, revise our plans and frameworks and recommendations that we have so far, put the rest of the detail in there, create the actual draft plan, get that to you guys, get that to some of our other stakeholders. And then throughout April and May, doing those reviews and revisions, getting that feedback, including a public comment period about putting this up on the website online, and people can look at it and comment on it. And then that leads us into approvals in June. We still have our website up, Kerrville2050.com. That'll remain up through the remainder of the project. So with that, that's all we have for you guys today. So thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you very much.
We get a copy of this.
So we'll publish this presentation on the website, and then if you like, I
Tomorrow
can email
morning.
you a link.
I would like one.
I like one.
That's great.
Otherwise, I gotta go buy 14 ink cartridges for my printer at home to do that.
Yeah, if you want one printed, just let me know and I'll print one for you.
I want one, please.
Yeah, so yeah, Drew has all the presentations
I'll just pick
from
it
all
up
the
and do it when
meetings
it's ready.
today. And then we'll put them up on the website tomorrow morning as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you
Well
guys.
done.
Very well done.
Well done.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay, Drew?
it's in tandem.
It is, definitely.
It's in tandem.
That's it.
All
We
right.
done?
Call the meeting.
So
All
we'll
right,
have
with
our
that said, we're
public
adjourned
engagement in about 30 minutes.
5:36.
You know, I've seen more than